Okay, what we're going to start to talk about today is actually FOIL, which is a method of the distributive property when we're multiplying like binomials times binomials or binomials times trinomials. And then we're going to look at the reverse of factoring. We're going to talk a little bit about factoring trinomials, okay? So the first thing let's look at is FOIL. What FOIL stands for is first, outer, inner, last. And it's a way of multiplying, like in this case, the binomial times the binomial. The first two terms would be those. The outer two terms would be here. So that's the first. Here's the outer. The inner is those two terms, and then the last would be here. Now, I like to have my students always draw it out because it reminds me sort of a crab claw or a lobster claw, and if they've drawn it out this way, they know they have the order right, okay? So if we're doing FOIL, the first thing I'm going to do now is multiply the 3 times the 6. Well, 3 times 6 is 18. Then I'm going to multiply 3 times 2x. So that's going to be plus 3 times 2x is 6x. Then the 7x times 16, well, 7 times 6 is 42x. And I like to line like variables up, so I'm going to put it right underneath there. And then the 7x times 2x is going to be a plus 14x squared. Now all I do is draw my line and I can add straight down. So it'd be 18 plus 42 plus 6 is 48x plus 14x squared, and now that would be my answer. Here, again, I'm going to multiply the first times the first, so a times 2a is 2a squared. A times a negative b is a minus ab. 3b times 2a is going to be a 6ab because we put them in alphabetical order. So 2 times 3 is 6ab, and then the 3b times a negative b would be a minus 3b squared. Add straight down, so this would be 2a squared plus, now there's an unwritten 1 right there, so it would be plus 5ab minus 3b squared. If there's a binomial times a trinomial, it's going to work the same. It's going to work exactly the same, except I'm going to multiply this by all 3 terms and then this by all 3 terms. So I'm going to multiply the x times the negative 5x squared, so that's going to be a negative 5x to the third. X minus x times x is x squared, and then plus x times 5 is a 5x. Here, 3 times the negative 5x squared would be a negative 15x squared, and I'm going to line it up with my like variables, so I'm going to say minus 15x squared. The 3 times the negative x is going to be a negative 3x, and then the 3 times the 5 is a plus 15. Draw my line and add straight down. So it's a negative 5x to the third minus 16x squared plus 2x plus 15. And that's how we FOIL. Now, let's go in reverse. Say I already have one and I want to factor it. Well, if you look at it, just by looking at it, we notice there's not a greatest common factor. If there was a greatest common factor, something that was common to all 3 of these monomials, I would take it out first. But in this case, they're not. So I can't factor a greatest common factor. So I'm going to have to realize that when I came over here, I multiplied a binomial times a binomial, I actually got a trinomial. So that's what I'm going to try to remember. I'm going to go back and look at it. And if you realize this times this value is always my first value. That's what it ended up to be. So what times what could be x squared? Well, we know x times x is x squared. So I know in that position will always be that value. I know this last one is always going to be what I multiplied this times this. If you notice, 3b times b was 3b squared, and that was my last term here. When I multiplied 7x times 2x, I got 14, and that was my last term here. So I know when I'm factoring that this is going to be whatever this value is times this value. Now I can tell you, this sign is going to tell me whether I added these two values or I subtracted those two values. If it's plus, I added them. If it's a minus, it means I'm going to subtract those two values. So I'm going to have to add two numbers that multiply to 10 that actually add to 7. Well, that's going to be a 5 and a 2. Because 5 times 2 is 10, but 5 plus 2 is 7. And if you realize over here, those middle terms, I'm either adding or I'm subtracting to get that middle term. So that's how that comes up. So now what would this be? Well, a positive plus a positive is always a positive. So it would be a plus and a plus. Had that been a minus, I know a negative plus a negative is a negative. So my two signs would have been a minus. So that sets my signs in the parentheses, and this tells me what I am doing to get this middle term. So let's look at this one. So I've got here and I have here. So I need to figure out what I can multiply to get 6x squared. Well, a lot of people want to go 6x and x. That's the easiest way to start it. And then on the last one would be a 2. So we'll put in 1 and 2 because 1 times 2. Here's the trick. This is a minus, so I know I'm going to have to subtract. So what I'm going to look at in the FOIL is this and this. I'm just going to look at that to get the middle term, because that's what gets the middle term. Well, 6x times 2x is 12x. And then 1 times x is x. Can you subtract 12x from x and get 1? No. So I know my numbers are not right. So I'm going to change one of them, okay? And this is just a little bit of a, just sort of a guessing game. The more you do, the better you get at this, I can tell you. Let's make this 3 and 2, because 3 times 2 is still 6. So I know 3x times 2x is still 6x. I'm going to leave this 2 and 1 right here. So 3x times 2 is actually going to be now 6x. 1 times 2 is 2x. Well, this is minus, so 6x minus 2x is not 1. So that's not right. But before I throw everything else away, before I go, I'm going to throw out the 3 and the 2, I'm just messed up, I can't do it, and ask my teacher, I'm going to go 2 and 3. I'm going to go that way. And let's switch the order a little bit and see if that actually works. Well, 2x times 2 is 4x, and 1 times 3 is 3. Now, if I subtract 4 from 3, I am getting a 1. So I've got it right. So I've got to figure out now my sign. I know it's positive, so I know the 4 has to be the positive and the 3 has to be the negative. So when I multiply 1 by 3, I want it to be the negative. So that means that's the negative. And when I multiply the 2x times x, I want it to be a positive. So when I multiply these, I know that now is my positive sign. And now it is factored. So when I'm looking at factoring, I'm not looking at the first or the last in FOIL. I'm looking at the outer 2 and the inner 2 to get that value right there. Let's look at this one. Now the very first thing I noticed, and if you know your multiplication tables, it's a lot easier to spot this. I know 2 will go into every one of these. So that's the very first thing I'm going to do. Get a greatest common factor out to make it much easier to factor that trinomial. So I'm going to factor out a 2, which gives me 3x squared minus 2x minus 8. Okay? Once I have that, now I can focus on this trinomial. Okay? I'm going to focus on the trinomial, so I'm going to give myself a little room. In the first position right here and here are the factors of that. So I know one's going to be 3x, and I know one's going to be an x, because 3x times x is 3x squared. Now I've got to work on the 8. I want to figure out what I can put in here. And in this case, I have to subtract, because that's telling me I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to subtract the values of 3 times 8, or the 3 times whatever the factors are of 8, and I'm going to get actually a 2. I'm looking right here, okay? So I'm going to make this a 2 and a 4, okay? So now if I look at the 3x times 2, well, that's 6x. And I'm going to look at 4 times x, and that's 4x. If I subtract the 6 from the 4, or the 4 from the 6, yeah, that's 2. Now I want to make sure it is minus. So if you're making this a negative, that means the larger of these two have to be negative when I'm subtracting. So that would be my negative, and that would be my positive. So, well, which would this sign be here? Well, I have to make sure that's a positive, so that would be my plus. In this case, I need to make sure this product is negative, so that would be my minus. Now, I can take this away, and I can take this away now, and it is now factored. I hope this helped you a little bit with your factoring and understanding how to break it down, maybe in a little different way. Y'all have a great day.